Oh, the minimum wage is never sufficient. You barely live above the breadline if you get a minimum wage. So, people that want to some degree prosper, and I'm not talking about getting rich, but just getting ahead, can't do it with a minimum wage. It's inadequate.
This story now, with the national minimum wage having been adjusted effective the 1st of March this year. The national minimum wage for all workers will be increased to 30 Rand 23 for each ordinary hour worked. This is an increase of 1 Rand 44 and equals about a 5% increase from the previous year. So it's slightly above inflation, which came in at 3.2% for the previous year. And the current minimum wage is 28 Rand 79. This is the first time the minimum wage exceeds 30 Rand per hour after being introduced in January 2019. That was seen as an iconic moment at 20 Rand per hour. Of course, it does differ according to certain categories. There are exceptions being made for EPWP, expanded public works, as well as farm workers. We'll get the latest now from Gerhard Papenfus, who is the CEO of the National Employers Association. Gerhard, good evening. Great to have you on the Power Business. What does this mean for employers on the 1st of March?
Thank you for having me. Well, there are different kinds of employers. One group is not affected by this at all. They pay their employees more than that, so it has no effect. Then there are those that try to pay the minimum wage, smaller businesses, struggling businesses, startups. They battle to pay it, but some pay it, some don't, because if you can't pay, you can't pay. And then, of course, there are those that definitely cannot pay. They either don't employ or they fly under the radar. And I think that to a very large extent, there are thousands of small little businesses that simply ignoring this because they can't pay. That's the principle. You can only pay if you can pay.
Right. But I mean, there are supposed to be strong repercussions for companies or individuals who are not meeting the minimum wage threshold.
Well, it's easy to say that. The point is, if you're a struggling little business and you can't pay, then what do? And that's the reality. The issue is not the companies that can pay and pay it, because let's face it, a minimum wage is inadequate. You can't feed a family on a minimum wage.
Right.
The minimum wage is never sufficient. You barely live above the breadline if you get a minimum wage. So, people that want to some degree prosper, and I'm not talking about getting rich, but just getting ahead, can't do it with a minimum wage. So it's inadequate. So the big issue here, and this is our issue, is what South Africa needs is a growing economy, more businesses that can pay more. Because what is happening is, what the minimum wage says is, unless you, an employee from that point of view, can find a business that pays him that 30 Rand and a couple of cents per hour, unless you can find that person, you'll be unemployed. And you can't negotiate anything less. And so that's the tragic about this whole thing. Where people get the minimum wage, there's a 5% increase. If you're happy with the minimum wage arrangement, then the 5% increase is at least something. But you know what? In many of these households where where the minimum wage is paid, the parent receive a minimum wage. There are children that needs to go to school. There are young people in that household who's unemployed. So, that 5,000 Rand is not only for one person, it's for a couple of people. So that's the tragedy about this whole thing, with a youth unemployment rate of 62% and the overall unemployment rate, the unofficial unemployment rate of over 40%. There are millions of people that cannot find a job. The strange part and interesting part of this whole thing is that the expanded public works program, they pay 16 Rand for, and what they say, the government says, is for job creation. But that's not really job creation, because no jobs are created. It's taxpayers' money that pays for people sort of doing jobs. Where the real jobs need to be created is in the private sector. And
okay. I just want to come in there. There's a couple things that I wanted to comment on, but maybe let's start with what you mentioned last, the EPWP workers. I see them picking up rubbish along the roads, mowing grass on verges. Those are definitely real jobs. They're definitely needed. In fact, I wish we had more. We definitely need that level of people working in our cities, in our rural areas, doing maintenance and cleaning up the areas.
But they get paid by tax money. They get paid by tax money, and why can't those jobs be contracted to private sector businesses and special arrangement in terms of wages is made? That's real jobs. That's real jobs. That's what we're saying.
Okay. We already have massive parts of the public service contracted out with all kinds of issues around corruption in tenders. And so I think it would be difficult to have another sector of public services contracted out. But I also just want to come back to another point that you make. And that is, and I understand that small businesses who are struggling often are not able to meet their minimum wage requirements. But the issue here is, since the minimum wage has been introduced, according to the Stiglitz report on inequality, there's actually been a decline in South Africa's wage inequality, not wealth inequality. And that's largely due to the minimum wage, somewhat due to the minimum wage. And it also creates a growing market. So there's more consumers for small businesses.
The point is, you need to find an employer that pays that. Now, the labor market dictates that employers compete with each other on wages. If you want a good employee, you compete with another employer on the services of that employee, and you pay them with. That increases the standard of living of employees, not the minimum wage. It's hard work, being reliable, development of skills over a period, that earns you better money, not a minimum wage. Because you will always, if that's the thing that you rely on is a minimum wage, you will always, to a very large extent, be poor. You can't work yourself.
So it only protects the most vulnerable workers. What actually lifts wages is productivity in the economy, which in South Africa we've battled with historically to improve productivity for various reasons. So the minimum wage is really for the most vulnerable workers, farm workers, domestic workers, and it's supposed to protect these people. But I'm understanding your point that it also is a challenge for small businesses. I don't think it should be a challenge for households, because I think households should employ someone based on their pocket, based on their affordability. Nobody deserves to have a full-time employee work for free or work for very close to nothing.
Again, if you can afford it. What does a person do if you have your salary, you can't afford that person? So what you'll do if the wage increase, then you'll reduce the working hours. So, and what am I saying? Am I saying that we need to abuse workers and don't pay them? We don't stand for that. We say any good businessman loves the idea of paying his employees and pay them well. That makes your business successful. We live in South Africa in a situation where, in many cases, that's not the case. And if you go to rural areas specifically and small businesses, the township economy, for instance, which is apparently a 300 billion rand economy, that consists out of many, many, many thousands of small businesses, vibrant. But they can't, in many cases, don't pay this. And what they do, they simply fly under the radar. So what we're saying is that the minimum wage is not that relevant. It's only a small portion that's actually paid on that level and sustained on that level. Many don't get it. They fly under the radar, and many employers pay beyond that.
Sure, absolutely. Let's go to the lines. Muzi is in Mamelodi. Good evening, Muzi.
Good evening. Thank you for taking my call.
Thank you, Muzi, for joining us.
Yes, but when it comes to issue of the minimum wage, I just want to ask the brother there regarding privatizing. I heard him telling you about how should we prioritize privatizing than allowing government to create smaller EPWP jobs which are not which are not fruitable to the employees. But mine was to say that for us on the ground, we see as it is privatizing the same business to the same person with a tender. It's going to be a tender. It's going to take us back to the issue of tenderpreneurship.
Right. I raised that concern.
And empowering individual. And also, my last parting shot, I'm also curious. I'm having problem with private businesses, especially the so-called SMMEs, which are not SMMEs with revenue. I'm having problem with them doing business with us. South Africa does not need over 70% of a private business to run itself. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much, Muzi. Gerhard, just another note there from Muzi about concerns about privatizing EPWP workers. And I expressed that as well, concerns about tender corruption and another part of the state that then gets contracted out. But I just want to quickly get your final thoughts then about the impact of the minimum wage over the last 7 years. Do you see businesses having had to fold because of the minimum wage? What has been your experience?
In the formal economy, a large part of this too, I mean, in agriculture, I'm interrupting myself. In agriculture, where farmers work with seasonal workers, sometimes in certain areas, in a particular moment, thousands, that the minimum wage comes very much at play there. And I think that's quite an issue. But these farmers pay it. And they pay according to, if they can't afford many, then they employ less. But in economic hubs of the country, the minimum wage is actually not relevant because employers pay beyond that. They pay more than that. It is more in rural areas. Wages are lower. So even in households, the income earners earn less. The wage is lower. It definitely impacts and it bites in that area. And I just want to say something about what Muzi has said. I couldn't hear properly. You know, when I say the private sector must do the jobs, but then we're talking about real entrepreneurs, not tenderpreneurs. Because I can understand if you give it to a tenderpreneurs, there's corruption involved, and that's a big issue. So Muzi, just to put you at ease, I'm not talking about that.
Okay. All right. Well, I think it's difficult to contract with the state for various reasons. We've seen some of that play out over the last few weeks and over the last few years. So I think it's difficult to differentiate people doing business with the state. It comes with a very high premium. Thank you so much, Gerhard Papenfus. We sort of sidetracked there about talking about the minimum wage. He is the National Employers Association CEO.